This is Dr. Rosie Kuhn, and this podcast series is called Spiritual Immersion, Taking the Plunge. An interesting thing happens when people are afraid or when they're facing crises, physical crisis, emotional crisis, spiritual crisis, environmental crisis, is that it's generally when people turn to God or they turn to spirit or they turn to their religion of choice or spiritual practices. And it's in those times where people start to question reality as a human being and our consensus view of reality and say, geez, I think maybe it's time that I start evolving and getting to know myself as a spirit being as well as a human being. So some people do this when they're facing cancer or other illnesses that seem to be consistent. Right now with the pandemic coronavirus situation, a lot of people are turning to spirituality and getting to know themselves. It's still early in the in the process, but there's a lot of people that are beginning to look at praying and meditation and discovering perhaps different ways of evolving themselves. So one of the questions that has come to my mind is, why do this? What's the point of this? Like, where is it going to get you? A long time ago, when I was in a crisis, anytime that I've been in these spiritual immersion processes, they've basically been initiated by some crisis. And so the rewards for me, this is like this particular podcast is about what are the rewards of doing this work? And some of the rewards are just intrinsic in the practices and getting to know yourself and the evolving of you. But then there's other rewards too that can be benefits that people might be looking for. What I was trying to do when I was in crisis was just find a way to out of the panic and the fear and the despair that I was in all the time. And that I realized the degree of dread that I had been living in for 50 some years. And to find a way out of that dread, despair, and panic and angst and anguish. Those were the words. That's all I had, because that's all I was I just wanted to get out of that. And so the focus on spiritual processes was where I went. So I focused on the Course in Miracles, which I'd been reading for a long time, but then really immersed myself even deeper. And David Hawkins' work. He wrote Power versus Force, and the book that I highly recommend is a book called Transcending the Levels of Consciousness. And then Oneness, which is written by Rasha. So I immerse myself in the readings in order to find solace, to find places of peace, and to find these moments where I wasn't in the despair and the anguish. So most of us, that's what we're looking for initially, is those places of peace and contentment, or a place that's restorative. If we stay there long enough, and if the crisis persists long enough to keep us in the process, something else begins to happen. We begin to see that this is not just a salve or something that is working now, and then when life gets better, I'll just ignore, I don't have to do this anymore. But it's a process where there's a learning curve, and there's an unfolding and expanding of you in this process that in a sense is an intrinsic reward in itself. In a sense, as you begin to cultivate awareness of who you are and cultivate a faith in something outside yourself, and we're always putting faith in outside of ourselves. We're putting our faith in the stock market, or in real estate, or in other people, or in our jobs, or in our retirement plans. We put faith in all of those. And sometimes those things disappear. And now what are you going to put your faith in? And this is where we go, well, there's the spirit self, there's the God, there's Jesus, there's Buddha, there's all these other spiritual presences in the divine universe to begin to cultivate a faith with. And that's big practice. But as we do that, as I've done that, I begin to have a reliance on something. I mentioned a couple of podcasts ago that when I was very young, I decided I was probably the smartest one in the room. And that's not because I was highly intelligent, but because I didn't see any place that was safe. I didn't see anyone that I could rely on that was safe and that I could trust. So my whole life, I spent being self-reliant, but hoping and praying and living in relationship with other people. And none of them were able to actually be there for me in a way that I could trust and feel safe. That's a come from for me. That's a particular patterning that I cultivated in myself. And so in these times of spiritual immersion and spiritual evolution, I had to begin to say, hey, I don't know everything. I'm not 6 years old deciding that I know everything. But to a very high degree, I was incredibly self-righteous. And that righteousness is, in a sense, I'm on a pedestal I put myself on. That righteousness keeps me safe in my righteousness, but it doesn't expand my level of faith and trust in the world or in God or in a higher evolution of myself. So this process of spiritual immersion opened me up to a faith in something greater than myself. And it has opened me up to a place of feeling safe in the world, regardless of this pandemic and the crises of whatever. I actually feel safe in the world. I actually trust in the world. That's huge. From where I was before, it's pretty amazing. So those are a couple of the elements of rewards, if you will, is you begin to expand who you are. I love when I'm talking with people who have that sense of expanded self. They know themselves in relation to a greater power, a universal power. And yet at the same time, a lot of those people still are working on elements or aspects of themselves that are still fear-based as opposed to love-based and essence-based or spirit-based. So those are conversations I'm having with a lot of people, and it's really wonderful. I'm loving those conversations because I'm learning and I'm seeing the humanness and the spirit self, the human spirit self at play in this time and in this evolving of every single one of us. So a couple of other rewards, if you will, that I experienced. In the book Oneness, I talk about, and I highly recommend it. It may not be a book for you, but it's a book that has made such a huge difference over the last 10 years because it's always speaking to me. Even though I've read it over and over again, I'm always reading something and I'm seeing it differently or hearing it differently and taking it in differently. That's an element of spiritual evolution in a sense that, and especially with good spiritual texts, they will always be communicating with you. The Bible, for people, is always communicating something new and fresh that they need to learn. And this is part of that surrendering my righteousness and all in order to listen for something different. I want to hear something different. I want to know the world differently than how I'm interpreting it. So my point in saying that is that, but the other thing is there's in the evolution of you, as you expand yourself into higher levels of knowing and consciousness and living and being more sustained, having those sustained places where you feel more content, feel less fear, feel less anguish. It's sometimes a lot more lesses than mores, but you're aware of that level of, I'm not feeling the dread I used to. I'm feeling more joy. Those kinds of things are great rewards. But the other element has been really fascinating is that things start to show up that are just effortless. So in a sense, I feel blessed when things are going my way more effortlessly. And that's things just show up, or a client will call, or a new person will want some coach training. Different things that show up, or somebody that says, hey, I'd like to interview you on my podcast, or another person who asked me to write for their newsletter. Those kinds of invitations that come without me having to do anything. And that was hard to get used to. Like, how did that happen? And it happens because I'm not limiting myself anymore based on past interpretations that life sucks or that I'm alone and nobody cares, nobody's there for me, nobody sees me. Those kinds of perceptions have gone away because of the work I've done. I've let those thoughts go and the emotional attachments to those thoughts. And so what shows up is what seems to be magic and miracles. It feels miraculous sometimes that what shows up. But the fact is, it's not miracle. I mean, that miracles are miracles, but the sense of, from a spiritual perspective, it's justified. It's linear. It just happens that way because the less limited my ability, the less I limit my perceptions of what's available, the more I let go of the density of my emotional attachments. Things show up effortlessly as I want them to. And that's really, really fun. And then the last thing I want to add is that communication with the other side, with oneness for me, is becoming more effortless and more clear and more trusting and more validating of who I am and what I'm up to in my life in this moment. That's huge. Again, another hugeness is that my relationship, it's like an intimate relationship that I'm beginning to trust more and more. It is an intimate relationship with my beloved. And that sense of connection and trust and safety is so much bigger than I ever imagined. And if you had told me 10 years ago when I started this earnestly, in my fears and despair and anguish, that this was possible, I'd say, when? Show me. Give it to me now. I can't wait. It's too long. And, I couldn't go a month. I was just in despair. And then another month and another month. And someone said, it's going to be 9 months. And those 9 months passed and I was still in despair. And it was like, when is this going to be over? And instead of it being over, it became an ongoing evolution of relationship that has evolved into something exquisite and trusting and trustworthy for me. And so right now I get to pass on some of that experience, that direct experience with you, not in terms of isn't it phenomenal and isn't it amazing, the amazingness of it, but the normalness of this process is what I'm sharing with you. The normalness of having a relationship with the divine every single day. Like, how awesome. I'm saying, oh, how awesome is that? And it's an element of normalness now of my life. And that's what I want for you. And that's what I want for you to cultivate for yourself in that process. It takes patience, and it takes a lot of surrendering, and it takes a lot of going down for the third time, as oneness says, again and again and again. It takes a lot of plummeting into the depths of old karmic patterns that aren't serving you anymore, and letting go and releasing. It takes the time it takes, and the rewards of such a process it's pretty exquisite, and it gets to be pretty normal, but not normal as in ho hum, but normal like, wow, this is really, really fun every day. And sometimes it's not so fun. Sometimes it's scary. Sometimes it's questioning again and uncertainty again. But generally I'm much more resilient in bouncing back from my despair in a very short period of time, as opposed to months or years. So I wish that, and I bless you with those thoughts. And if you have any questions, or comments, you can leave them at Podbean, or you can email me at rosie@theparadigmshifts.com. You can visit me at my website, theparadigmshifts.com, and you can see blogs and videos and other offerings such as coaching or coach training. And that's pretty much it. All right, big hugs. Bye for now.